Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's first big discussion on the artist and his or her audience. As you can see, we have a star collection of artists, some of the most renowned, some of the most highly paid, some of the most sought after in India. They are Anjali Elamenon, Bharti Kher, Atul Dodia, Jitish Kalat, and Dayanita Singh. And over the next half hour, 45 minutes, depending upon how much you can take, we're going to talk about art, the artist and his audience, a subject, I warn you, that can be frequently highfalutin, often pretentious. Tonight, I hope it becomes simple and possibly even easy to understand. Let me start, Anjali Elamenon, with you, and let me start with a blunt, simple question. What is art? We all think we know, but can you define it? Or does, forgive my language, the wretched thing defy definition?
That's such a hard one. Thanks a lot for giving me such a difficult one, Karan. But you know, what is art really requires volumes. It means, I would say that it means very different things to very many people, including all of us here on this panel. I don't think I can define that. I have to bow out of that question, because there are just too many definitions of what art is. But as far as I'm concerned, it's something that absorbs me, it's something that drives me, it's something that has a life of its own, and I'm its slave.
Who defines art? The artist or the viewer or the buyer?
Neither. I mean, none of them, I don't think. I think it is the critics, those who write, it's the philosophers. Over the years, it's been other people rather than artists who really define what art is. As I said, for each artist, the definition is different, each for themselves. Some rely on inspiration, some rely on satire, political message. There are many, many ways of art. And today there are something like 6 or 7 lakh artists in this country. And I don't think any of them could fall under the same definition at all.
Bharti Kher, I read in Business Standard, and I think it was the 28th of July 2012, that an art collector, Anupam Podar, once bought cow pats made out of cow excreta from your husband Subodh Gupta. Were those cow pats art? Or if you pardon the pun, were they simply shit?
Hi, Karan. Such a nice question. Art is faith. It's all about faith. And artists name things. And when they've named them, they become those very things. So the question of what actually is art, it's nothing. It's nothing to anybody. It's nothing to me. But if I put faith in an object and I believe in that object, for me it becomes art. Whether you believe in that object or not makes no difference to me. Whether somebody buys it, and if they believe that that object has meaning, then that meaning for them is something that takes them on a journey as well. The art world is a very interesting place because actually we're all crazy people. And we all have this, we all have a madness, and the madness is really about companionship. And it's about a journey, it's about conversations, it's about questions that don't have answers, it's about answers that, that don't even take you anywhere specifically. So if, when fellow travelers talk to us, walk with us, it's not to say that the artist is ahead and you are behind, or they follow and we go. We all sort of walk together in some ways. So your question is not really to be an answered one, I'm afraid.
But I like the concept of art as faith. Does it mean that the relationship between the artist and the viewer, or the buyer, is a bit like God and the believer?
God and the believer. I'm an atheist, so I don't really do that one, so.
Let me put that to you, Atul Dodia. Does art have to be appreciated by the eye, understood by the mind, or ultimately, does it have to touch something in your heart?
all of this, actually, because, I mean, of course, it's a visual art we are talking about, and so you see it, one thing. The kind of art we do, it has definitely lots of emotion in it, so obviously it comes from heart and it's seen that way. Say a color red means something for me, something to me, and it could be totally different emotionally feeling, about the same color, how you would feel. So, depends, and like I remember when I did my shutter works, for the early shutter works where I would invite viewer to throw it up and pull it down. So it was not just you experience with your eyes, but you also use your muscles. There's a sound, there is a very heavy industrial sound which when it hits up and all that. So I think it all together, makes the work work, and that's how you experience the whole thing.
Jitish Kanath, many ordinary people, and probably I put myself at the forefront of that, find modern art obscure and perplexing. They look at it and they don't know what to make of it. Does the fault lie in them because they lack sensitivity, or is there an onus on the artist to make himself understandable?
We didn't realize Karan's going to appear as devil's advocate. But, well, I don't think the fault really lies with anybody, because I mean, partly as Bharti said, it actually isn't. I mean, the art appears in the conspiracy at the moment of viewing. And that's a very silent internal process. I call it a conspiracy because others can't see it. It happens somewhere in your mind's eye as a viewer, and it may not be actually what the artist intended. So you can actually watch a viewer jaywalk away from your intention in the manner in which the person's viewing it. But I think that would be incidental to the entire process of actually making or exhibiting your work. I mean, everyone should be free to experience art or life or every object the way they choose to. And I think really the rules shouldn't vary too much for art.
But I suppose what I was asking is this: what do you say to a viewer who looks at a painting and says, I don't understand what I'm seeing? Whose fault is it that he doesn't understand?
Well, I think we often ascribe elite status to what the brain can tell you. I mean, there are many, many ways in which we view things. I mean, we view things with our mind's eye, with our body. We also view through a cellular system. It's the fact that you don't have your brain telling you examples from artistry while you look at an object doesn't disqualify the viewing without the knowledge of art. So you could actually look at an object without essentially being tutored with the idea of art as you would expect it to be viewed. So there isn't one way of viewing. There's not a manual of viewerly instructions.
So there's no correct and wrong way of seeing a painting?
There isn't. I mean, you can progressively educate yourself with artistry if you choose to, but I think that again would be ascribing one particular way of viewing art, which is valuable but not necessary.
I suppose this raises the question then, it's saying, who are artists, or in your case photographers, producing for? Do you take pictures for yourself? Do you do them for a selected, chosen buyer? Or do you do it for the vast audience, for a wider audience, for the general public? Who do you have in mind when you click the camera?
I'm not a photographer, Karan. You got that wrong. I'm very pleased to say. I'm an artist, and photography is my raw material. I make images.
Are photographers not artists? Are they a lower breed of human being?
No, I think it requires being the author of your work to make art with it. I think just making photographs is not necessarily enough, certainly for me. That was what I had come to realize over many years, and went towards the book precisely because I wanted a form with that photography. Just the images were not enough for me. But I forgot your question.
So who do you compose for when you click the camera? Is it for yourself, for a buyer in mind, or for a wide audience and general appreciation?
I think you give too much importance to the buyer. You asked someone else that question. I don't think any artist is thinking of a buyer when they are working. Largely for whatever it is that is interesting me. But sometimes I make photographs for friends that I'm thinking about, or writers I have read, or musicians whose work I have got very inspired by. They may not even know about it, they may never know about it, but that is what gives me the inspiration and drives the entire work, sometimes over years. One piece of music, one book.
So it's a personal expression, not a public statement.
It's a personal expression that sometimes does become a public statement, but that's not the reason I do it. I just feel I have to do something, and I do it. I totally, totally believe in it, get obsessed with it. It leads me to the form. I don't have a form to start with. So now the form is making museums, so I make museums. The form might change, but the work drives the form. It's not just making images. I think that's important to say.
Anjali Ella Menon, I want to put that same question to you in a sense. Is an Anjali Ella Menon painting a personal expression or a public statement? And I'll ask you to explain, when you answer that, something you said in an interview to me for the BBC 15 years ago. You said, the struggle of the artist no one can share, not your friends, not your family. What I paint is selfish for me.
Absolutely. I think one is self-driven, and I mean, a lot of people feel that the struggle of the artist is the struggle in the garret, where you suffer, where you have no money, where you starve. We've all been through that as well for brief periods. But the struggle of the artist is really finding your own path. Certainly, I know that there's a whole school of thinking that doesn't believe that the signature is important, but to find your own signature. And the second struggle, which very few people realize, is when you're trying to transition from one phase to the other. What do you keep? What do you reject? You can have sleepless nights over that sort of thing. I think we all have our problems with our own work, and that is the struggle.
Bharti, there's a delightful quotation of yours from an interview you gave to Numero in February last year. You say, to make art, you mustn't be human. You have to leave the body you know and smell with your tongue, hear with your flesh, taste with your eyes, try to touch what you can't hear, and see with your nose. And as I read it, I said to myself, that's either terribly profound or utterly meaningless. Which is it? Explain to me. I'm completely baffled, but intrigued hugely.
Of course, it's extremely profound, Karan. Of course it is. You know, there's a part of me that, as an artist, believes that I am not actually a human being. And when I make art, I sometimes go and I travel in another axis. And I believe that I can time travel. I become another person. I see in other dimensions. And so when we go back to you asking this question, because I'm actually intrigued by this question of what the public and who do we make art for, the idea that, you see, I'm a scholar. I'm a scholar of art in the way that you may be a scholar of what you do, and you practice and you work every day. I don't know what the Dow Jones means. If I want to know what it means, I have to go and learn about it. In the same way, if you want to enter the art world, and I may be very snobbish here, and I do purport to be quite elite. I am elite. If you want to know about my world, you have to enter my world in the way that I have. If I wish to enter your world, I have to make an effort. If I want to go and speak, if I want to go to Greece and I want to speak to people, I have to learn how to speak Greek. So the art world is a place where, if you wish to enter, we are very welcoming. But there is a scholarship. There is a lot of people who have spent probably their lifetimes doing things actually that nobody needs. Art is a vocation actually of doing things that don't need to be done. It's like music, it's like poetry. Nobody needs poetry, nobody needs music, but what is it about it that makes you feel so very connected? And it goes back to my quotation. If you want to be an artist, you cannot be human. These are very primal. We are all primordial beings. And at some level, we all need to go back to our primal self. It makes us feel good. You don't make art from here. You make art from your stomach.
A variant of that answer, Atul Dodia, is something that you said in an interview to the magazine Art India. You said, my art has its roots in other art. It grows from there. And I know from what I've read that your work often incorporates images from artists like Picasso, Cézanne, Rabindranath Tagore, Duchamp. But what happens to the viewer who doesn't recognize those images or those references? He or she is clearly lost. Now, does that worry you, or do you not care? Or do you say, like Bharti does, go educate yourself if you want to try and understand me, and if you won't, to hell with you?
No, I won't say that. I think viewer is extremely important to me. I am not an artist who just sits in a kind of a ivory tower or in a very quiet place, keep on working and that's it, and keep producing. As soon as I do something, there's this tremendous amount of need and urge to share with somebody. So it could be my mother, it could be my neighbor, artist friends, general public, and I never have this feeling about that there are special educated people who can only understand art. Because I have seen in my career about when you are exhibiting, sometimes even those who are well-versed, regularly visiting or gallery goers, coming to art exhibitions, but not necessarily sometimes the points which are supposed to be seen are missed. But a general lay person, very humble, they come and kind of, they make some remarks which are quite fantastic. Okay, that's one thing. But second thing is, about, I think, yeah, it's true that art comes from art. You go to, say, Mahabaleshwar or Matheran on a sunset point and you see sunrise or sunset. You don't paint, but you see Van Gogh's sun. You see Sky by Turner. And then, I think, that triggers. So I think it's, what we see in life is one thing. That doesn't, kind of inspires or kind of encourages ones to kind of create work, but it is the art which generates art. That's definitely, that's what I believe.
So let me be naughty. Unlike Bharti, you don't see with your nose, taste with your eyes, smell with your tongue.
No, I don't.
Which means you're human when you paint.
Well, that was a way of saying probably, but what I mean is this, that, yeah, your whole body is involved while painting. It's not just, like, how to say, but it's, yeah, it's like, there is so much involvement. It's not just that when I leave my studio, it's over. No, I still carry with me. I sleep, I drink, I eat. The concern with creativity, concern with painting, it remains all the time. So I think probably it's in that broader context probably one must see it.
This is fascinating. Is art elitist, as I think I understood Bharti to say, or is it for everyone? In other words, is it for the cognoscenti who understand, or is it for Buddhus like me who don't?
I think in Bharti, in her defense, is saying that you didn't say that. I mean, I think, well, Karan, art is for everyone. I mean, it's, and it is possibly not everyone is able to access art. I mean, life takes its time to to claim its time on you and your time. And I think, when, art does take time out of your life, and few people can do that. And I think fundamentally maybe that's something we need to rectify, that probably art can actually be a way of thinking. That you actually, we think through language, and maybe I think at a very fundamental level within the education system, I think we can actually reinscribe a way of thinking where art can actually be a way to sharpen your faculties.
Can I put it like this? Can anyone who walks into the Tate Modern understand what they're seeing?
Which is why I think that the word understand means that there's a particular thing that
Appreciate.
Each
like.
Well, to appreciate, to understand, and to like, you got to actually employ that same seat of elite knowledge called the brain. But I think there are many, many ways in which art is computed. So, like Atul said, that somebody can actually bring neither like, dislike, which is judgment, or particular forms of appreciation which you think is what you think is an understanding of art, and yet might come with a completely insightful way of actually accessing art, which I think is something that is possible. Doesn't always happen, but that's possible. But I think there is also a code through which, and here I think what Bharti was trying to point to is there's a code through which you understand art through the understanding of art. And I think Atul suggested that too, because when you look at a sunset, you would remember a whole set of sunsets that make you look at the sunset differently. And that's yet another way of looking at art. So I think there's not one way of looking at art, as there is not one thing called art,
Danitha, is art also a way of understanding the artist behind it? How much of your work reveals you? Or to put it differently, if one looks collectively at your oeuvre, does it plot a sort of autobiography?
In my case, I think it does. Sometimes it's very hidden, like in File Room, but that happens to be my most biographical work. But that's not the point. The point is what you, Karan, will get from seeing the work, what you take away from it. You might think it's deathly boring to see rooms full of files. You might think it's really exciting, you have a visceral response. Whatever it is, I can't do anything about it because I made that work. I make my work because I have to. And I go through that process. So it's wonderful if you do like it, appreciate it, get angry, respond in some way. Liking doesn't matter. It's about whether you respond. But if you don't, I can't change what I do. I'm not working for someone out there.
But then, do I understand you correctly if I say what you're telling me is art is not saying so much about the artist, it's actually telling the viewer something about himself or herself when he or she responds to it.
In the best case scenario, that is wonderful
so
if that happens.
So it reveals something about me to me.
That would be wonderful if that happens. But I think if it can just shift something in your imagination, that's a lot already. And if it goes to as far as revealing something to you about yourself, that's incredible. It happens sometimes, and it's quite magical when that does.
And therefore, do all art forms work the same way? Dance, music, painting, sculpture? They reveal something about the viewer to the viewer, assuming the viewer is sensitive enough to feel it.
I think it's great that you talk about all the forms, because if I can just continue with what Chitish said, I think it's wonderful that India today has these art awards. But I think what would be great is if there was actually a course on creativity in the schools. Because I think if you learn to dissect art, it actually helps you figure out a lot of other things in life. It's a way of living. And if you can teach that, I'm asking for the moon when I ask for a course on creativity. But if we could teach that in the schools, I wanted to go to the IAS Academy and teach creativity, but nobody would have me. I think there is a lot to be said for art education at a school level, at a college level, in the kind of people you become and the responses you have.
The IS Academy, I take it, is not the Islamic State Academy. It's a different IS you have in mind. Anjali Menon, you once said in an interview, market success has little to do with artistic worth. But if a painting is not to be judged by the price it sells, how do you objectively assess its value? Or is it impossible to be objective about art? Is all appreciation necessarily subjective, individual, personal?
The market certainly has begun to play a very important role in this whole art world. And I think that's unfortunate, because if you're going to link the value of a painting to its present market value, which also fluctuates madly, the market is extremely fickle. So I think artists have to really detach themselves or keep themselves as far away from their aspirations in the market. I wouldn't say from the market, but from their aspirations in the market. And I say this very much to a lot of young artists who go in or who take up this profession or vocation, whatever you might call it, for the wrong reasons. So I don't think that we should be at all or ever governed by what we perceive the market is going to do to us. I think that's really the way to hell.
Bharti, I was forewarned before I began that at no cost must you ask her questions about the cost or price or money, so I won't. But I'll ask you a different question instead. Artists get identified in the mind of the press, and maybe even the public, with the price at which their work sells. How disagreeable is that?
So, actually, what I want to talk about quickly is just to go back to the other idea of what art was, because I just wanted to pick up on what Daini does. I'm going to totally ignore your question. Is that how is it that we actually see? So, actually, you're not a Philistine. Since the day you were born, you have been processing 100 frames a second. Every time we look out in the world, we are processing information, and these are images. When you look at art, you have to understand that art is really about people who slow time images. What we're doing is actually capturing the moment, and we're slowing it down. So sometimes what happens is that it becomes so slow that you think that you don't really understand it. You do understand it. You're seeing everything that artists are looking and making and seeing. You're seeing them every day. So what Atul was saying, again, I wasn't specifically saying that I don't care, but you also have to learn, and it's what Dainita was talking about. How do we make people relearn how and what it is they see? How do they hear? What are they listening to? What kind of sounds are they hearing? How do you process them and change them in your senses so that you can actually hear things that you see? I just wanted to say that because I feel that what happens I had a really amazing art teacher when I was at school, and I think for me that shaped my entire life. I think what I was taught was not only how to look at the positive, but I was taught how to look at negative space. And I actually never really understood that. And I'm 8 years old, and my teacher's saying to me, so look at this cup, and look at this bottle, and look at the table. Now I want you to draw everything that's not the table. You're sort of wondering, what is he talking about? I don't understand. And we spent literally a week drawing every single thing except the still life. And by drawing the space around the still life, the curtains, the table, Atul, myself, this chair, basically what you arrive at is this table. So a lot of the time, what art is a reversal of all the things that you know. It's not a question of not understanding. It's actually accepting that you do not understand. And that is the beginning of the premise of props looking at art, I think.
Okay. I want to come back still to that question of the relationship between artist and money. Because whilst artists may not paint with money in mind, artists do survive by selling their paintings, and money is important for all artists. So at the end of the day, what's the difference between an artist who survives by selling his wares and a merchant and a trader? I'm asking him.
Don't call it wares.
I must tell you this story. It's, I think I was in third year at the JJ School of Art. And of course, before that, when I joined art school, my parents were told by neighbors, family, relatives that he should not go to fine arts. He won't survive. I mean, it's like he will starve. There's no future. Let him do applied art, textile designing, interior designing, but not painting. But I was passionate, and my parents recognized that, and they allowed me. When I was in third year, I met an artist called Prabhakar Barve, late Prabhakar Barve in Bombay. And one of the things he told me that, I mean, of course, we all need money and, survive. Well, it's important thing, of course, otherwise how you do. But that's not an issue. You can. The most important thing is the creativity, your own work. If you can't afford, oil on canvas, then you do watercolors. If you can't do watercolors, do pen and ink drawings. If we can't afford that, then we'll take cooked rice and newspaper and do collage. But we will just do that. We would not kind of, succumb to the market and demand and then what is required in the, or people like it and you just do that. No. So I think that was the kind of, idea. And I saw Barve working in a single bedroom studio, and Tayyab Mehta all life. He painted in one bedroom, which was his studio. So I think money is really not important at all. It's not important. It's a creativity, the experience of a work of art. I mean, what happens when you see a work of art, we forget ourselves. I mean, that's the thing.
How insulted does an artist feel when the media talks about him and her simply in terms of the price at which their paintings are sold? Because that happens in headlines. You've seen it,
It's
2 crores,
very
10 crores, 100
I
crores.
totally agree. It's very sad. I had told in one of my interviews that, you see, when Tayyab Mehta, all life he painted, and he was not mentioned in any American newspaper. When the painting was sold in an auction for $1 million, the more than a half-page article appeared in New York Times. Why not before that? You judge an artist not by his work, but by the money he fetches. That's very bad.
Tell me, Jitesh, about the relationship between an artist and his or her work. Does it stop, that relationship, when it's finished and it's sold? Or do you passionately care about what happens thereafter? Who owns it, how it's framed, what it's surrounded by, and even perhaps what people think of it?
Well, the relationship, I think, continues. I mean, not in the manner that you describe it, but I think in the manner that you continue to sort of rethink what you did. And in a particular moment, and a work, long gone, suddenly reincarnates as a new work. And I think that's a process that we are always in the midst of. I mean, our studio is nothing but the reincarnation of older works that essentially find new meaning. And I think so in that sense, perennially the work is never ending. It's actually, when you said the work stops, I think that itself seems somehow untrue, because it stopped for that moment, but I think in a sense it's only a matter of time before it announces itself again. And that's really part of the process of making work, it doesn't ever leave you.
So are you possessive about what you produce? Is there a sort of umbilical cord that never snaps?
Not in that sense. I mean, I think I used to feel more possessive. I think I'm less defensive about my work as well. I mean, I wouldn't defend fiercely because that is not the space at which I think of my work anymore. I mean, I think a few years ago I would, I mean, even today if I'm asked to do a talk on my work or a lecture on my work, I think I see it maybe a little differently now that the relationship has changed. If I talk about a work from the past, I think I need to think about it while I talk about it. Otherwise, talking about it is pointless. It's like a post-mortem, which is irrelevant. But I think if it has to be in real time and meaningful. So not everything one makes is meaningful for one all the time. It's meaningful from time to time.
Danita, I want to ask you a very different question. Is this 2016 an exciting time to be an artist in India?
I think it's a very difficult time to be an artist, and my advice to everyone who asks me is to get a job. I think if people come to art thinking that there's a boom and they're going to be making lots of money, that's a very wrong reason to come to art. There's other things to do, but if they are dying to make art and they are willing to paint with rice and tea bags or whatever it is that is available to them, they have to have a job. So I think, for me, I would say to people it's really important to find another way of earning a living. And then if you're still driven and you can't bear to live without it, then you do it somehow.
But can you explain how you began? You said this is a very bad time to be an artist in India.
It's a bad time because I think a lot of younger people looked at my generation and thought, oh great, we can make a great living. And forgetting that there was a time of a certain boom that came and it went. And that was not the reason to become an artist. So now, I hope it'll be a better year. I hope people will start to realize that they're artists because they can't bear to not make art, but that there might be other ways to make a living as well.
One quick question. Do artists need to go through the experience of living in a garret, poverty, suffering, pain, to produce or inspire the muse?
No, I think people need to read, to go to literature, to go to music, to go to cinema to be inspired. I don't think it's necessary to be in what you're suggesting. I mean, that's this great romantic idea. But I think to think that you can survive as an artist doing... what happens to an artist in India, for example, if you're not doing work that could be potentially saleable in a gallery? What happens to those artists? One Khoj, one Kiran Nadar Museum, one Devi Foundation, maybe 2 residencies in Bombay. It's really difficult. How, if you make work that cannot be sold in the gallery, how do you expect to live? And so how will art change?
Anjali Elamenon, most people would say that the economic climate of the day must matter at some level to artists because they have to sell. But what about the political environment? Does that impact an artist? And does the political ambiance in which he or she lives have an impact on creativity?
Only if we succumb. The short answer.
So the artist has to be resilient and resistant and a fighter.
Absolutely. We have to stand our ground in spite of what's happening.
Is the challenge greater when the political environment is adverse?
Of course the challenge is greater, but I hope that very few of us will succumb.
And when you say you mustn't succumb, is that to be expressed through the painting or the art that the artist produces?
No, we must continue to do what we believe in, what we have been doing. We shouldn't suddenly change our style or our subject matter to suit some kind of political pressures. But here, Karan, I would like to change this topic a little bit to, perhaps I don't have another turn, to say that you yourself have said that you didn't understand modern art. The point is that for us, it's been a wonderful time for art because look at the barriers that have been broken down. The barriers between painting and sculpture, between sculpture and installations. We have the kind of freedom of choice of subject matter and source material that we've never had before. And our greatest artists today, people like Subodh and Bharti and all the other panelists here, they are prime examples of that phenomenon where they are reacting and responding to the visual matrix of our own times. It's not that we're delving back into our past.
I want to come back to this theme, Bharti Kher, about the environment in which the artist paints, sculpts, sings, dances. Is Modi's India a better environment for the Indian artist? Or was Sonya's India more comforting? Or does it simply not matter? Does the artist isolate himself and herself from the media's focus on what they call tolerance, intolerance, and the atmosphere? Is it irrelevant to the artist? Is it germane to the artist? That's the context in which I want to put it. Does it matter to you, the mood of the nation you're living in, or how the media presents it?
You're asking, to the artist, nothing is irrelevant. Everything is relevant. We are probably the finest witnesses to what happens in an age, and if you look through history, it has always been the case. If I talk today about Modi's India, everybody knows very well what's happening. What I suggest, my suggestion, is just not, it's very simple. I think if you wish to see a country that expands in terms of, let's not talk about our GDP and all that, it's so boring. What about in terms of culture? How are we spreading, how are we talking about our ideas? What are we looking at in terms of a global structure? You know, we just need very simple things in India. It's not rocket science, and I don't care about politics. I couldn't care whether the Congress was in or the BJP in, they're all the same as far as I'm concerned. It makes no difference. What do we actually need to do? We need to sit down and actually have dialogue, which means that you need to positively look at what are the things that can be done. Why is it that almost every single person or half the creative people in the country are being totally ignored when it comes to policies of culture? How is it that we don't have an arts council? And if we did have an arts council, excuse me, I do not want a bureaucrat running my arts council. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not going to go and say tomorrow I'm going to perform surgery in AIMS. I'm an artist. This is what I do. I am good at what I do. There are very many brilliant people in India who have been systematically ignored for a very, very long time, and they need a voice, and they need to determine and say how it is culture should be seen in India. And it's not to say, you know, you can't keep blaming the government, by the way. You don't do this, and you don't do that, and you don't do the other. People like Kiran, you've taken the reins, Anupam, Lekha, they take the reins, they started something on their own. This is what we need to do in India, but we need to be friends too. We need to support each other and say, okay, so if one starts a museum, how do we do it? Who comes into the government that's going to help us to sort of take away all these ridiculous blockades that are in place? Because actually, we are such a small percentage of the population that nobody really pays much attention to us anyway. And it's very interesting. If you look at the global art market internationally in 2014, I mean, it's very strange. I only read this because I was reading the Artist newspaper the other day. $68 billion. It's bigger than agriculture in America. It's bigger than the medicinal industry. There's so much potential, not just in terms of money, but just in terms of what we can share. We have 800 museums in this country that are functioning. We have no directors. Why? How difficult is that to do? I mean, the average housewife could manage. The average housewife could manage it better than these guys are managing it. I simply can't understand. Our galleries function brilliantly well. The artists are running studios. We're all working. We're all doing. Why is it that we have no policy on arts? I don't understand.
Atul Dodia, how does the artist define failure? Or is there no such thing as failure for an artist? Is failure lack of recognition by critics? Is failure a personal dissatisfaction with what you produce because it isn't what you wanted and you thought it would be? Is it inability to sell? Or is there no concept of failure for artists?
Probably there's no concept of failure. I tell you why. Because I think, when you do something, it's a process. Sometimes you take very long, few days to complete a work of art. Sometimes it's quite quick, but still, it's never a pre-planned, chalked out program which you have in mind, and this is what you want to achieve and here what you want to go. You don't know, actually you're finding. So the process is quite complex. In that context, I think it's you work and you try to do few things, but at the same time, one would kind of, start seeing things in the process. Okay, this is where I'm going, and this is where it should go. and sometimes it doesn't happen. So you feel that probably you've failed. But I think that's a very much part of the whole creative process. And we just accept it, acknowledge it, and kind of, move further. Because as soon as a work of art is done, like, you were talking about the collectors, and you asked the question, Jirish, about the attachment of work with a work of art. But generally it happens that you do it and then it's over, it's out. It should be out from my studio. It's like I immediately, I'm engaged in totally new set of problems, set of questions, So I think that's the way artists work. And that's the way, we kind of, we survive on those lines.
I'm running out of time. I want to ask just 2 quick questions to you before I end. Are artists changing the world by the way they depict it, which is different to the way ordinary people like me see it?
Well, artists, I think, cannot set out with the agenda of trying to change the world. I think it has to be, I think, in the process of probably changing themselves and hoping that the artwork carries the potential to transform a single viewer at any given moment in time. Maybe that's a process of transformation, but it's not a process that you can actually inscribe as a kind of internal manifesto that the work of art you're making with the purpose of changing the world. I think that would be, at least to my mind, not the manner in which I look at art. I think it cannot be addressed in that way to my mind. It has to probably be just the inverse. And perhaps also to let the entire change in the world be internalized to then be the process of making the work that in turn can then change the world.
Danita, can I ask you the same question as well?
I think art can ask questions. I think art is very good at putting the question out there in different languages. And I don't think art can change the world or give the solutions. I mean, the problems of this world are immense, and art is a very small part of all of that. But yes, it can put the questions out there. And I think creativity, if we had studies of creativity or education in creativity, I think that would really help solve some of the problems of the world. I think that would help. I don't know if art can help, but creativity, certainly.
I'm afraid we've come right to the end of this discussion. My thanks to all the members of the panel for their fascinating answers. And my apologies, Bharti, I wasn't picking at you. I was simply being, as Jitish said, devil's advocate. And thank you very much for being such a wonderful sporting audience. Goodbye.